From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. Many Americans forced to choose between paying medical bills or maintaining holiday cheer. Scientists say Omicron variant border bans ignore evidence. NASA awards $415 million to fund 3 commercial space stations. UN seats denied to Afghanistan's TALIBAN and Burma's JUNTA. UN approves resolution to call Masjid Al-Aqsa by its Muslim name. Nigeria recruits churches and mosques to speed up mass vaccinations. Our top story tonight. Many American households are struggling to pay for medical expenses, forcing some to make difficult choices, according to a new study. A 2021 AFLAC Healthcare Issues Survey released on Thursday shows that apart from working more and foregoing medical care, a number of American families are cutting back on holiday expenses. Even with health insurance, families that experienced COVID-19 and those with children were especially hard hit. The latest Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data shows that more than 45 million Americans tested positive for COVID-19 since the pandemic began. Over 60% had out-of-pocket healthcare expenses in the past 12 months. More than 20% reported over $1,500 in out-of-pocket expenses versus 16% of non-COVID-19 households. Over 50 countries have increased border controls to slow the spread of COVID-19 Omicron variant. The highly mutated variant of concern is sweeping through South Africa and circulating globally. Researchers say many of the restrictions, particularly those targeting travelers from a few select countries, are unlikely to keep Omicron out. Karen Greppen, a health economist at the University of Hong Kong who studies border control measures, said she is not that optimistic these measures will have an impact. Scientists in some affected countries say travel bans risk slowing down research on Omicron by limiting the arrival of imported lab supplies. NASA on Thursday awarded 3 companies hundreds of millions of dollars to develop commercial space stations. Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin, NanoRacks aerospace company, and defense contractor Northrop Grumman were awarded $130 million, $160 million, and $125 million in contracts, respectively. A fourth company, Axiom Space, was previously awarded a $140 million contract. NASA's goal is to eventually replace the International Space Station, which is due to retire at the end of the decade. The space agency is increasingly turning to private industry to develop hardware it used to make itself reduce costs and focus on its ambitious goals. Those include building habitats on the moon and preparing for a crewed mission to Mars. Using crutches and prosthetic legs, players in the Gaza Strip on Thursday aimed to qualify for the Amputee Football World Cup as part of the first Palestinian national team. The team trained at the Palestinian Stadium in Gaza City under the supervision of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Its 20 players were selected from amongst 5 Gaza clubs for players who have lost limbs. Player Hassan Abu Karim told AFP his leg was amputated after he was injured in a 2006 Israeli raid at Al-Maghazi refugee camp. Yet he continued with his ambition and goal to represent Palestine. Red Cross spokeswoman Sohair Zaqut said that the players were training for qualifying matches to be held this March in Iran. The Amputee Football World Cup is stated to be held in Turkey in late 2022. Milorad Dodik, the Serbian member of Bosnia-Herzegovina's tripartite presidency, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday for talks in Moscow. The Kremlin has not released any information about what the men discussed. After the meeting, Dodik praised Putin's familiarity with the situation in the Balkans. He touted the attention the Russian Federation had given to Republika Srpska, the Serb-dominated group, and a Bosniak and Croat federation collectively make up Bosnia. Dodik is one of the 3 members of the Bosnian presidency as established by a peace treaty, which ended a bloody 3-year civil war in 1995. He has threatened the secession of Republika Srpska from the rest of Bosnia and has diplomatic support from Moscow. Halal products are becoming a trend in Russia. More Russian producers are catering to the growing domestic Muslim community, which accounts for around 15% of the country's population. In some cases, they're also setting their sights on exports. The halal ash plant in the city of Chirtkova was amongst the first of its kind when it opened 2 decades ago. It recreates Soviet-style sausages in accordance with Islamic law, amongst other products. But the focus on halal is not restricted to food. Russia's largest lender, Sberbank, rolled out the country's first halal exchange traded fund last month. A United Nations committee has deferred a decision on applications by the rulers of Afghanistan and Burma to replace government envoys. Afghanistan's Taliban and Burma's junta are widely regarded as pariahs. The leadership of both countries is seeking to gain international recognition. The UN committee effectively denied, at least for now, attempts by the ruling authorities to occupy seats at the United Nations. Non-state schools educate 350 million children and youth worldwide. However, UNESCO's new Global Education Monitoring Report shows many countries lack adequate regulations on private education or the capacity to enforce them. This undermines quality and widens the educational divide between rich and poor. In many countries, these schools operate without any oversight. The report shows only 27% of countries explicitly prohibit profit-making in primary and secondary schools. Many countries prevent student admission procedures in schools. Only 7% of countries have quotas to enhance access to schools for disadvantaged students. A terrible tragedy in Georgia. A 14-year-old girl was fatally shot last week by her 13-year-old brother. The juvenile had been charged with felony murder, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office said in a news release. Sheriff Tim Pounds told CNN on Wednesday the boy who sells and makes ghost guns accidentally shot his sister while attempting to hit someone else. The shooting allegedly occurred when people came to the family's home in Douglasville to purchase the guns, which were assembled without serial numbers, Pounds said. They stole the weapons instead, prompting the boy to fire shots as they left the house and inadvertently hit his own sister. The European Union has allocated $367 million in additional funding for refugees in Turkey, the European Commission said on Thursday. That will extend the emergency social safety net program until 2023. The financial support would provide refugees monthly transfers to cover essentials like rent, bills, food, and medicine. Turkey has been a key transit point for asylum seekers aiming to cross into Europe, fleeing war and persecution. Turkey already hosts 4 million refugees, more than any other country in the world. The United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution 129-11 on Wednesday to call the Masjid Al-Aqsa compound solely by its Muslim name, Al-Haram Al-Sharif. The Jerusalem resolution is a part of a push by the Palestinian Authority and Arab states to reclaim one of Islam's holy sites, which Jews also claim as their own. The United States opposed the text, saying the omission of inclusive terminology for the site sacred to 3 faiths was of real and serious concern. Situated in the heart of Jerusalem's old city, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is Islam's 3rd holiest site. It is also where Jews claim the ancient Jewish temple stood 2,000 years ago. A mosque in the Brazilian city of Ponta Grossa was vandalized on November 26th. Unknown perpetrators broke into the building before the first morning prayer. Sheikh Mahmoud Shamsi, who lives in the same development as the mosque, said 4 volumes of the Quran were taken out of a wardrobe and burnt. The mosque kitchen was also broken into and the walls were dirtied. The house of worship was found more than 40 years ago by members of the Lebanese community. Nigeria is recruiting religious leaders, churches, mosques, and government offices to mobilize its COVID-19 vaccination campaign. The government is fearing a surge in cases over the Christmas season. The country on Wednesday reported its first cases of the OMICRON variant, which has prompted new travel bans. Africa's most populous nation has thus far escaped the brunt of the global pandemic. Its recorded cases are low, around 214,000 registered infections and just under 3,000 deaths since the pandemic began. Nigeria has a population of about 210 million, but has fully vaccinated only 3.5 million people. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. For our in-depth analysis segment, let's go over to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid.
There is a summit about climate, and people are saying this may be our last chance. People are using strong words. United Nations chief says we're digging our own grave. And the Prime Minister Johnson of the United Kingdom is borrowing words or the absence of words and saying it's time to do something instead of blah, blah, blah. And the Miss blah, blah, blah herself is there saying these people are not going to do anything. To discuss all of that with us is someone who is a veteran of 7 United Nations summits. And today she is comfortably at Ann Arbor instead of crowds in Scotland. Jennifer Haverkamp.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Jennifer, tell us, are you happy with the announcement being made so far about what people are going to do about the climate change?
Yes and no. I wish there were more announcements. I wish there were more ambitious announcements, especially from some of the countries we haven't heard from yet. But on the other hand, I am seeing some very positive signs which will contribute to the momentum that we need to come out of this conference with. I'm referring in particular to India now having come forward with an announcement for trying to get to net zero by 2070, which will not be easy for India. And also the United States announcements today about their own reductions, their own plans to reduce emissions from methane, and that 90 countries have joined together in a pact to reduce their emissions from methane, which is really, really important.
I thought that when the Modi of India announced in 2070, I thought that is too far. But I'm happy to hear that it gives you hope. Do you think it is good enough if everybody achieves net zero by 2070?
Certainly not if everybody does by 2070. The globe has to get there by 2050. But there was always the expectation that India, given its level of development, would have to have time for its emissions to grow before they started to go down again. Their date for peaking was later than those of the developed world. The other thing that gives me hope is that each of these announcements that countries are making, the process under the Paris Agreement is that every 5 years they come back together to say, can we do more? So what you're hearing today are the commitments of what countries today think they can do, but with advances in technology and policy and greater political will, my hope is that each time the countries get back together, they will be able to improve these targets to where we really get to where we need to be.
Jennifer, considering that you have attended 7 of these summits and today is 26th of this summit which is taking place, have you seen that gradual that each time a conference takes place, humanity is taking a better step, or as people outside are saying blah, blah, blah?
Well, when these conferences of parties, these summits happen every year, it's hard for people on the outside to get a sense of which ones will particularly be important for moving the ball forward and which ones are more just implementing the agreements that they made last time around. And this one is really important for it being the first time since Paris in 2015 when countries are coming forward with their newer, more ambitious targets. It's also an important one for countries making clear what their plans are for providing financial assistance to the developing countries who need help adapting to and adjusting to the effects of climate change. And it's also important for finishing one last piece of what they call the Paris Rule Book for how to implement the Paris Agreement, and that has to do with emissions trading among countries.
It is said that $100 billion a year will be needed to assist the developing countries to achieve their goals and targets and move away from the fossil fuels. But only 10 billion have been raised so far, and not every year total. Do you think the commitments to assist a developing world move away from the fossil fuel are keeping up with what needs to be done?
I don't think the commitments are anywhere near what's needed. The commitment that we're talking about was made back in 2009 in Copenhagen when developed countries agreed to mobilize $100 billion a year by 2020. And they have missed that mark. But there was a study an analysis that just came out, I believe, by the British government that said they should be there by 2023. It's important to know that they count under mobilizing private finance as well as public finance. But your first question is still true. My answer to your first question is I still stand by, which is that there is not enough money going out to help countries with their resilience, with their adaptation. And frankly, if we don't reduce emissions at the rate we need to, those dollars needed will just go up and up and up.
Is this the reason the United Nations chief is saying that we are digging our graves?
I think the reason he's using that really vivid, dark analogy is because what we are doing with our continued reliance on fossil fuels is to ensure that we will not see safe levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Digging our own graves is that even while we are talking about shifting to a low carbon economy, countries are still building coal-fired power plants. Countries are still building out natural gas infrastructure. Companies are still purchasing and developing fossil fuel reserves, even though the atmosphere can't take the emissions that would come from them.
Is this because the development of green technology is slow? Batteries which can preserve energies are not coming out and growing in a bigger way. What are the reasoning why people still continue to go to something which is so disastrous?
Well, I think there's a very legitimate need for energy, especially in the developing world where there's a lot of undercapacity. And fossil fuels are, for a variety of reasons, in many places still affordable. They're still the familiar technology. There's still actually an enormous amount of subsidies of fossil fuels so that the correct price signals aren't being sent. The prices are going down on renewable energy, on green hydrogen, I think will come around. There's a lot more technology that is still to come, which I think will make the alternatives to fossil fuels increasingly available and affordable. But it's been the energy sources that most of the world has relied on for well over a century, and it's a very powerful industry with a lot of political support in places that matter.
So United States, Jennifer, says that it will achieve a zero emission by 2050. India says 2070. What does China say, and has you seen any progress, any part of these people?
So I think the figure that matters for China is I believe that they have said that they expect to peak their emissions before 2030, and then get them down. None of these commitments at the moment add up to what is needed, and the commitments that came out of Paris didn't. The commitments this round didn't, but again, I think that what we need to hope for is that over time, the commitments will get more stringent and will eventually get to where we have to get in terms of the actual greenhouse gas emission reductions. The other thing that I think is worth keeping in mind is in parallel to what the governments are committing, you have the private sector innovating. You have customers demanding low carbon products and low carbon processes. And so as important as these meetings of world leaders are, they are not the only front on which the fight is being fought.
I was watching Mali. They had this huge lake, which is nothing but sand now. And so is climate justice being considered a serious enough of an issue? Because there is a warfare because of water, different people are, nation states, nationalism is rising, the sovereignty is being, asserted over water sources. So do you think climate justice has been good enough of a subject for these deliberations?
I think that climate justice needs to be brought even more front and center into the deliberations across the UN conversations, across national governments, across every level. But one of the real tragedies of the situation we're in is that it is often the countries who are the least responsible for the problem themselves, the ones that are low emitters, who are least well prepared to deal with the drought, the fires, the flooding. Small island nations, for them, this is an existential crisis. Some of them will be flooded out and their people will become refugees moving to other countries. And it's how you deal with the equities around that is one of the biggest challenges for the world trying to address this collectively.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time. Jennifer, our camp is coming to us from Ann Arbor, Michigan. She has been a veteran of 7 United Nations climate summits, and she's a former ambassador with and a special representative during the Obama time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.